This is Mrs. Miller, your teacher at ELA Academy. Today, I'll introduce you to rhetoric and rhetorical analysis. AP Language and Composition students are the most obvious audience, but really any human being who communicates with another human being will find this helpful. Rhetoric is just a fancy word for the art of communicating effectively. You might recognize this slide from my video analyzing Mark Antony's funeral speech in Julius Caesar. As I pointed out then, rhetoric is a huge field of study that encompasses many concepts. In that video, we just focused on the rhetorical appeals, ethos, pathos, and logos. But there are so many other things we can analyze in order to understand and appreciate a persuasive text. These concepts just scratch the surface. You'll see a lot of fancy words associated with rhetoric, but please don't get intimidated by them. Most of them are Greek words because the ancient Greeks laid all the foundations for our study of rhetoric. We just kept their original terms because, well, they sound cool. Also, it would probably be a big pain to invent all new words when the old ones work just fine. By the way, did you notice what I did there? I used rhetoric, just like all of us do in our everyday speech. Let's do a quick soapstone analysis to see what I did and how I did it. First, who's the speaker? Me, Mrs. Miller, a teacher. What's the occasion? What prompted me to make this video? Well, I noticed that my students often seemed intimidated by rhetoric, so I decided to make it easier to understand. Who is my audience? My audience is anyone who wants to understand how persuasion works. And yes, that especially includes AP Lang students, but like I said earlier, everyone can benefit. But what else do I know about you? I knew that if you hit play on this video, you would be looking for an intro to rhetoric, not a PhD. You want the basics, and you want to know why in the world you should even be interested. What was my purpose on the last two slides? To persuade my audience that rhetoric isn't as hard as the Greek terminology makes it look. I also want to get more people to study and understand rhetoric. What's the subject of this video? The basics of rhetoric and rhetorical analysis. Again, not at PhD level. And finally, what's my tone? I've been using simple diction, easy vocabulary to set the audience at ease. Instead of sophisticated diction, I said things like fancy words. I also used the vernacular, casual language that ordinary people use, like they sound cool and it would probably be a big pain. That vernacular and simple diction help to create a reassuring tone. I'm also enthusiastic because I'm excited about rhetoric and I want you to be excited as well. Remember that I called this a soapstone analysis? That's just an acronym to help you remember the steps we just used. Speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, subject, and tone. Soapstone is an indispensable way to begin any rhetorical analysis. And that wasn't too painful, was it? Now, remember all of these terms? These are what we call rhetorical devices. Okay, another fancy term. Well, what's a device? It's anything that you can use as a tool. Just like you use a hammer to drive a nail or a saw to cut wood, an author or speaker uses each of these rhetorical devices to do something. It's easy to get lost in all of the Greek words, so just remember, whatever you're analyzing, the author's purpose is to persuade the audience and to make his or her words stick in their heads. Using a variety of devices just makes it artistic and keeps it from sounding too repetitive. If you've watched my Annotation 101 video, you know that I'm not a fan of simply identifying devices. Like, oh look, there's a anaphora. Oh look, a polysyndeton. Wow, look at all the devices. Devices everywhere. A rhetorical analysis shouldn't just be like walking around with a pokeball and scooping up all the rhetorical devices. It's great if you can find them, but that doesn't mean that you've said anything meaningful. In fact, on the AP Lang test, the instructions for question 2, the rhetorical analysis essay, have changed over the years to try to keep students from just making a long list of the devices they found in the reading. The instructions now ask students to analyze the author's rhetorical strategies or rhetorical choices. In fact, go have a look at the scoring guide for question 2 on the 2015 exam. You'll find it in the blog post linked below. It reads, "This year's analysis question directed students' attention not to rhetorical devices or even rhetorical strategies, but to rhetorical choices made by Cesar Chavez." This terminology was selected to emphasize the primacy of authorial agency and communicative purpose. That means what message the author is trying to convey and the effect he hoped to have on his audience, over the implementation of formal tropes in the text. That means the graders aren't really as interested in whether you can identify specific devices with their fancy Greek names. They're more interested in whether you understand the author's purpose and how its delivery affects the audience. Think about it this way. What's the point of rhetorical analysis? What are you analyzing? Almost always something persuasive. A speech, an essay, an advertisement. Who's the audience of something persuasive? Not someone who already agrees with you or who already buys lots of your product. Your audience is someone who hasn't decided to buy your product yet or who disagrees with you on something. In fact, they might disagree so strongly that it almost seems impossible to bring them over to your side. So then, what does persuasion do? It tries to move the audience from disagreement to agreement, or from non-buying to buying. Think of a persuasive text as a map. Let's say you're a student at the University of Texas at Arlington, and you want to drive to AT&T Stadium to watch a Cowboys game. Can you drive your car straight from point A to point B? I don't think that's even possible. Sure, you could bump your car over curbs and fields, but what happens when there's a house right in front of you? Sometimes going straight to the point means you're running straight into obstacles that are hard to overcome. Well, in our example, of course, you'll drive your car on roads that were made for your car. The roads are generally smooth and easy to drive on. There are traffic laws and lights and stop signs to keep cars from colliding, and they make a point of going around the obstacles. It's not a perfect analogy, but this is kind of what rhetoric does. Sometimes the most effective way to persuade somebody is not the shortest way. It takes some twists and turns and following laws in order to arrive safely at your destination, the audience's changed mind. Mark Antony's funeral oration is a great example. He has to take an audience who loves Brutus and hates Caesar and persuade them to love Caesar and hate Brutus. It sounds impossible, but gosh darn if he doesn't actually do it. Go check out the video to see how. Now, I'm afraid I might have made it sound like you shouldn't even worry about specific rhetorical devices when you analyze something. That's not totally true. They really can give you some interesting things to say. I just don't want you to get so focused on little things like, oh, look, those two words rhyme, and forget about the big picture, the author's purpose. But the really cool thing that rhetorical devices are good for is using them in your own writing. The better you get at using a variety of rhetorical devices, the more powerful and artistic your writing or speaking will become. And to me, that's the main reason for analyzing their use in stuff you read, hear, or see. It'll give you a wider variety of tools in your persuasive toolbox. And who doesn't want to do a better job at getting what we want? That's all for the intro to rhetoric and rhetorical analysis, but keep an eye out for demonstration videos showing you how to perform rhetorical analysis and write analytical essays. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me and my blog on social media. And if you like what I'm doing here, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. This is ELA Academy.